As a HPE student and future teacher, it is important that I am able to analyze physical activity and detect the interrelationship between various movement skills. In this short video, I'll be analyzing the stroke of freestyle, particularly looking at the arm stroke style and technique. Firstly, I'll be looking at how a beginner's stroke compares to a professional swimmer's stroke and the areas where the stroke particularly needs to be worked on. I'll then be discussing various activities which can be completed by the learner in order to improve their stroke and practice their movement skill. So if we firstly take a look at this video, we can see the swimmer's movement is extremely efficient and effective. For each stroke he's completing, he's maximizing his power. He's a very low stroke rate compared to the distance he is covering. On top of this, he's displaying almost perfect rhythm and timing his stroke so that he maintains optimal position without losing lift and propulsion. On top of this, his body position maintains lateral alignment with legs, hips, shoulders and arms all being level and near to the surface of the water. And his head rotation to breathe coincides with his opposite hip drive. This helps him to maintain his streamline and create less drag. Building on this, the swimmer's kick is constant, providing him with propulsion, balance and stability. When he kicks, his feet are also plantar flexed and slightly inverted, timing his kick to coincide with the opposite arm stroke entry. With this technique, the swimmer is maximizing power and efficiency. Looking more specifically at the swimmer's arm movement, we notice his arm recovery. When the swimmer brings forward his arm outside of the water, he's trying to do so in a way which reduces de-alignment of his body. There should be minimal lateral movement and the swimmer tries to keep his arm close to the water to provide just a short period of no effort. This also maximizes speed. This involves the swimmer bringing his arm up and then moving it straight forwards towards the opposite end of the pool. On top of this, the swimmer's elbow is leading his hand until it passes his shoulder. If we take a look more closely, we can also see the swimmer's hand entry. His hand enters the water in a way which the fingers hit the water first, lengthening forward directly in front of the same shoulder, with his middle finger pointing towards the opposite end of the pool. Through the swimmer doing this, he is reducing forces against his body and maximizing the propulsion and force he is pulling behind his body. Looking at the swimmer's reach, he angles his hand so his fingertips and wrists are just slightly angled downwards facing the bottom of the pool. This leads to a successful down sweep where the swimmer should begin to position their arm for the catch. As displayed by the swimmer, the down sweep involves flexion of the wrist, beginning to move the hand downward. The arm is then also pulled down in a curved but linear motion. The arm should be flexed during this process until the point where the elbow comes up above the hand. Alignment should be made with the hand, forearm and upper arm facing these sections backwards with a high elbow catch position. After this, the catch should be made where the palm of the hand and undersides of upper arm and forearm should be facing behind you. This will help propulsion through the water as water is forced behind the body. The swimmer then is in position for the in sweep. He correctly positions his arm so that it is flexed at the elbow approximately 125 degrees so that his hand is positioned underneath the chest and fingertips are vertical with the shoulder. At this point, the swimmer is preparing for the upsweep, where his shoulders and back muscles should engage. The upsweep is providing the swimmer with his power. As shown, the swimmer has brought his hand outwards and upwards from underneath the body to the surface of the water. His hand pulls backwards underneath his body so that until around thigh position, where he then continues back into recovery. The swimmer also extends his arm slightly during the upsweep to maintain water pressure but does not extend it too far upwards to ensure that the body is being propelled in the most efficient way. When swimmers use the techniques displayed by this professional, they achieve the best efficiency in their stroke and maximize their ability to be effective in their skill, potentially enabling them to swim faster or over a longer distance or period of time. In contrast, we begin to look at the swimmer who is not as experienced. Although this swimmer can move through the water, he isn't as effective and efficient as the professional swimmer. He lacks much of the technique required to be proficient and streamlined within the water. Broadly, we can see his technique creates a lot of drag and his body is creating friction within the water, causing him to be slower and have to work harder. This means his stroke rate will be higher within a certain time because of his lack of efficiency to cover distance in a short amount of time. On top of this, he is lacking rhythm and timing, where when we are comparing his stroke to his hip thrust and leg movement, he seems to be moving his arms, however his kicks are not in pattern or rhythm, slowing him down, causing an imbalance in the stroke. On top of this, he is over-rotating his body, causing unnecessary energy use and inefficiency. Furthermore, his legs are hanging in the water and dragging him down. His body is not well laterally aligned, with pretty much all parts of his body being away from the surface of the water. Comparing this to the experienced swimmer, whose body is laterally aligned, this seems extremely inefficient. Positively, his breathing technique is sufficient in that it coincides with his opposite hip drive, however his head is quite high above the water. As opposed to the top swimmer, the bottom swimmer lacks an effective kick. His kick rate is too slow and lacks power and direction, meaning that his legs are dropping, causing him to be slower and have less balance, using excessive rotation, further causing resistance against the water rather than streamline. With this second swimmer, it is clearly evident that he is not as effective and efficient as the first swimmer we looked at. The second swimmer is providing more effort for less success. So from what areas of the stroke is he actually failing? Specifically, looking at the swimmer's arm movement, he's struggling with arm recovery. After watching the first swimmer, we have seen his arm recovery is aligned and fairly low to the water. In contrast to this, the second swimmer brings his arm high out of the water, rotating heavily and not bending at the elbow, keeping his arm too straight with the hand leading. He also displays a high level of lateral movement, creating de-alignment of his body, resulting in further drag and resistance, cutting the power of the stroke short. This also means that his period of no effort is lengthened, slowing him down. We can also look at the second swimmer's hand entry. His hand enters the water quite flat rather than smoothly, with fingertips as displayed by the first swimmer. Rather than lengthening forward, he is almost creating a slap, reducing possible power and force he can propel behind his body. When observing the second swimmer's reach, due to his failed hand entry, his hands are positioned parallel to the water's surface with no angle at all. He is not set up well to continue to the catch. His reach is also not positioned in alignment, but rather positioned away and too far to the side in relation to his body. Further leading to failure is a swimmer's downsweep. As observed, the downsweep is quite stiff and straight-armed. The swimmer does not flex at the wrist and does not move in a curved linear motion, but rather a straight-armed push. On top of this, the elbow is not coming above the hand, rather the hand is making the lead, which fails to employ the larger muscles such as the lats. This means that when the swimmer catches the water, he will be forcing the water in the wrong direction and will not have as much power. From the downsweep, the second swimmer then aims to perform a catch. The swimmer's catch is very poor in that it fails to catch much water at all, since the arm is rotated incorrectly and almost completely straight with the undersides of the upper arm and forearm facing internally. This means that his arm is almost streamlined rather than wide like a paddle, pushing through the water. It also means that any power the swimmer is presenting is being presented through his hands rather than the stronger area and wider areas of the forearm, which ultimately can move more water. This means the swimmer is being less efficient and creating less propulsion. If we take a look at the swimmer's in-sweep, we also notice his arm is positioned incorrectly with very limited elbow flexion towards the body. His arm is rather straight and away from the midline of the body, and his hand is not positioned anywhere near the optimal position of beneath the chest. This means that the water is being pushed more to the sides and downwards rather than behind the swimmer. When we analyze the second swimmer's upsweep, we notice that it lacks power and directions. He seems to direct his upsweep far away from his body once again, causing incorrect distribution of power, pushing the water next to his body rather than behind it. The swimmer arguably overextends his arm, causing heavy rotation, leading to a heavier opposing force and heightened level of drag, ultimately slowing him down and making him less efficient in the water. Ultimately, when viewing these two swimmers together, we are able to find the downfalls of a poor stroke style. We're also able to observe and take into account the aspects which build to form an efficient and effective stroke style. It is clearly noticeable that the second swimmer needs to practice in areas to improve on his stroke if he wants to become better at swimming freestyle. He particularly needs to work on his stroke performance. Therefore, within the next video, I've displayed 2 activities to improve this. As seen in the previous video, which analysed a non-proficient swimmer versus a proficient swimmer, we can note that the non-proficient swimmer needs to improve in many areas, particularly within his stroke style. This means improving in a range of areas such as arm recovery, reach, down sweep, catch, in sweep and up sweep. Through improving in these areas, the swimmer will be on the way to perform a higher level of swimming efficiency and will display a higher level of effectiveness in his stroke. This will mean that ultimately his stroke rate should decrease because he is able to cover a further distance per stroke. There are a number of activities aimed at performing the stroke, however, I've selected 2 which I believe will be most beneficial for this particular swimmer's skill level and ability. To begin, the first activity involves the implementation of a kickboard and a pull buoy. The kickboard should be held by the swimmer with their hands placed gripping the end of the board, touching the midline. To complement this, the swimmer will also place a pull buoy between their legs at a point where they feel like the weight is taken off their legs. Once given these devices, the swimmer should be instructed on the areas they need to work on and how to improve in these areas. For instance, the swimmer may be asked to specifically focus on how they catch the water and recover their arm within freestyle. To complement this, they would be instructed on the correct techniques to achieve this. So why give the swimmer a kickboard and a pull buoy? Through implementation of the pull buoy and kickboard, it is breaking down the movement into manageable sections for the learner. Firstly, by doing this, the devices are increasing the buoyancy of the swimmer. Specifically with the pull buoy, the downward force is being taken off the swimmer's legs, meaning that they do not have to kick to stay afloat. By removing the aspect of the kicking, this allows the swimmer to focus on the other aspects, specifically within this case, the swimmer's arm and stroke. Similarly to this, the implementation of the kickboard also provides a swimmer with buoyancy towards the front of their body around their arms. These devices take away the need for the swimmer to stay afloat, allowing them to solely focus on their stroke style. Also, by the swimmer gripping the kickboard in the middle, it is encouraging swimmers to replicate this movement when kickboard is removed. The kickboard encourages the learner to bring their arms fully out in front of their body. On top of this, the kickboard is preventing too much rotation of the shoulders. Through practicing with these devices, it leads to the swimmer in improving their position, efficiency, and power. To build on this, when the swimmer is comfortable, they can remove the kickboard. By removing the kickboard, the swimmer is able to gain an appropriate feel as to how the stroke actually works when having less buoyancy in the front section of their body while still being supported by the pull buoy. This promotes a slow, steady level of skill progression, allowing the learner to practice in a way where they can feel comfortable and in control of their movements. Eventually, through practice, the swimmer will be able to remove all devices and their stroke style should have improved. Another activity which a learner may be able to implement to improve their freestyle stroke is the implementation of hand paddles. As seen in the video, the swimmer has completely incorrect hand and arm angles when catching the water and completing other aspects of the stroke. The swimmer struggles to feel how they can improve themselves with more power and perform a more effective and efficient stroke. To implement the use of these hand paddles, the practicing swimmer should be instructed on how to use the devices. They should be instructed on areas where they should be focusing on in order to improve their swimming style. For instance, the instructor may state to the swimmer that they should have constant force through the hand paddle and should be focusing on techniques that they use to propel the water in a backward motion. So why should we complete this activity by providing the swimmer with a hand panel? Through implementation of these devices, it allows the swimmer to better understand and feel how their hand is positioned and moving through the water. It is also encouraging the swimmer to use constant force against the water in order to keep the paddle attached. This promotes better propulsion through the water. Through using this, the swimmer will be able to more easily understand how they need to position their hand throughout the stroke in order to swim more proficiently. The device allows the swimmer to make changes to their style through self-teaching and self-analysis. Through this, the learner may implement a trial and error strategy to see what techniques they feel most comfortable using whilst completing the movement skill. To more closely focus on their hand style and movement, the pull buoy between the legs may also be implemented for this activity. This will once again take away the need for a swimmer to kick their legs, allowing them to focus solely on their hand and arm positioning and movement. In conclusion, through correct implementation of these activities, the swimmer should be able to improve on the focus area of their stroke style and technique. They should be able to learn to swim more efficiently and effectively, hopefully allowing them to eventually reach a level of competency.